There are moments in the flow of history when darkness seems to engulf humanity entirely, yet a solitary star still shines, illuminating the vast night sky. Many believe that to change the world requires immense power, but in truth, a heart full of faith and a soul steadfast in purpose can achieve it, and far beyond. Greetings, dear friends. Today, I invite you to journey back to the 19th century, to a story that is nothing short of extraordinary. The story of a man who composed a symphony of faith amidst the coldest winters of human despair. The story of George Müller, a man who fed thousands of orphans, not through grand financial campaigns, nor earthly power, but solely through silent prayers and an unshakable faith. This story will lead you from the grimy streets of Industrial Revolution era England, where coal-dusted rooftops loomed over hollow-eyed children, deep into the heart of a redeemed man, then expand outward to a transformed community, and finally reflect back into your own life. In 1805, in the somber villages of Prussia, now Germany, a boy named George Müller was born. From an early age, George slipped into a life of sin, stealing, cheating, drowning in vice. But in 1825, upon attending a modest Bible study held in a small upper room, 20-year-old George Müller was touched by the light of the gospel. If God is truly a loving Father, he mused, then I shall place my whole life into his hands. By the 1830s, in the city of Bristol, England, the heavy toll of the Industrial Revolution was evident. Orphan children wandered the streets, begging for scraps, shivering beneath the misty rain. Bristol's winters then were brutal. Dense fogs cloaked the city like a mourning shroud. Its people, ground down by survival, had little space left in their hearts to care for the destitute. It was in this backdrop that George Müller, now a pastor, began his extraordinary mission. With mere pennies in his pocket, he did not fundraise in the conventional sense. Instead, he knelt on the cold, bare floors and prayed, Heavenly Father, if this is thy will, provide. And the first seed of hope sprouted. A man knocked on his door, offering a small sum. A woman soon followed, donating a few old beds. No advertising, no grand campaigns, only silent prayers, and a faith that would not yield. One evening, when the orphanage was packed with little faces, and there was no food for breakfast, his staff panicked. George Müller remained calm. Let us thank God, he said, for he will surely provide. At dawn, before the children had stirred, a baker knocked on the door. He explained that he couldn't sleep all night, feeling compelled to bake extra bread for the orphanage. Moments later, a milkman arrived. His cart had broken down right outside, and the milk would spoil unless used immediately. Thus, warm loaves and sweet milk arrived, as if summoned from heaven. This journey was far from easy. George Müller faced countless hardships, scarcity, disease, ridicule. Internally, he struggled, torn between fear and faith. On many a freezing night, he spent hours on his knees, heart writhing with doubts. Am I mad? Relying only on invisible prayers? Yet each time doubt surged, he clung to the scriptures, for we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. Thus anchored, he pressed on. Gradually, the community around him began to change. Merchants, craftsmen, even impoverished housewives began contributing coins, loaves, blankets. No one was coerced, no one manipulated. They were simply moved by a living, breathing faith, vividly alive before their very eyes. A quiet fire spread, melting the ice of indifference in human hearts. Throughout his lifetime, George Müller established 5 large orphanages, caring for over 10,000 children, without ever incurring debt or making public appeals for money. He meticulously recorded over 50,000 answered prayers in his journals, a living testimony to the unwavering faithfulness of God. Looking back upon this story, we are invited to contemplate, Faith is not blind recklessness, but a firm reliance on the one who never breaks his promises. As the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, faith is a leap into the unseen, but the heart knows into whose arms it leaps. An Eastern proverb reminds us, he who has faith can move mountains. And even the Buddha taught, within a fearless heart lies a power that cannot be shaken. So today, where might you and I begin? First, cultivate the habit of spending 5 quiet minutes each morning in prayer, not merely to ask for things, but to place your heart into God's loving hands. Second, nurture a strong affirmation within, I live by faith, not by sight. Third, engage in small acts of kindness, a smile, a caring word, for these seemingly minor deeds may be miracles for someone else. If you long for a deeper life of faith, hesitate no longer. Quiet your heart, pray, and listen for the gentle whisper of the Lord, as George Müller once did amid the storms of life. If today's story has touched your heart, please like, share this video with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future journeys of faith and hope. In our next video, we'll explore the moving journey of Gladys Aylward, a missionary woman who crossed battlefields and saved hundreds of children amidst the fires of war-torn China. Thank you sincerely for staying with us until the end of today's story. May the peace of God, flowing like a mighty river, flood your soul, and may the fire of faith burn brightly in every step you take.